He didn't even look up from his bourbon glass when he said it. "You're just a waitress, Tara. Be grateful anyone wants you around." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood behind the bar staring at the man who used to pack my school lunches and braid my hair with trembling fingers. That man, my father, who now sat at table 7 every Thursday, with his new wife, a woman only 5 years older than me, and pretended I didn't matter. But what really broke me wasn't the insult. It was that I believed it. For a second, I actually believed him. People assume that rock bottom comes with drama, a breakdown, a scandal, a crime. But for me, it came in the form of 4 words. "You're just a waitress." The funny part. That restaurant wasn't even his. It belonged to Eddie Trammell, who'd owned it since the Reagan years and ran it like a kingdom built on grease and nostalgia. I knew every creak in those floorboards, every stubborn screw in the walk-in freezer, every table that wobbled just slightly to the left. I knew it better than my own apartment, better than my own body some days. And still, I was just a waitress. I worked the Thursday night shift on purpose. That was when Dad came in, always with Cheryl, always with that smug smile that curved just enough to remind me that he hadn't been to one of my birthday dinners since I was 15, but somehow made it to every single one of Cheryl's niece's baby showers. That night, as I handed their check to their table, Cheryl laughed a little too hard at something I didn't hear. Her manicured fingers grazed Dad's hand. Her wine glass was still half full, but her eyes were sharp and alert. I waited, silent, polite, waiting for someone to notice me as something more than a shadow in an apron. Instead, Dad signed the check without making eye contact. "You ever think about going back to school, sweetheart?" Cheryl asked sweetly, almost mockingly. "I hear there are great scholarships for, older students." She meant failures. "No plans right now?" I said, tucking the receipt into the leather folder and walking away before my hands shook. Later, Eddie cornered me in the stockroom. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. He narrowed his eyes. "He's still treating you like gum under his shoe." I shrugged. He doesn't matter. But Eddie had been around long enough to know that the things you pretend don't matter are usually the ones that kill you slowly. That night I stayed after closing. Everyone else had clocked out. I turned off the neon signs one by one. The city outside hummed its usual lullaby of drunk laughter, passing cars, and distant sirens. I poured myself a tiny shot of amaretto from behind the bar, not for the buzz, just for the ritual. And I sat at table 7, his table, and I thought, what if this was mine? The thought came suddenly like a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. What if this restaurant was mine? Not Eddie's, not a place I slung hash and wiped ketchup off laminated menus, but mine. What if I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me from my own life? The next day I found out Eddie had been talking about selling. "I'm tired," he admitted over burnt coffee in his office. "None of my kids want it. I was going to post a listing next week." I didn't tell him what my father had said. I didn't tell him about Cheryl, or the way my hands had trembled all night after hearing those words. I just asked, "What would you want for it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Why, you know someone?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, me." He laughed. But it wasn't the dismissive kind. It was the surprised, maybe even impressed kind. The kind that said, "Huh. I didn't expect that, but maybe you've got something I didn't see before." "I'd need a down payment," he said, suddenly serious. "And a real plan." "I'll get it," I said. I didn't sleep that night. I made lists. I Googled SBA loans. I texted an ex-boyfriend who still owed me $1,500. I called my Aunt Marla, the only relative who ever showed up to my high school plays, and asked if she'd co-sign. 2 weeks later, Eddie handed me the keys. Temporarily, a trial run, but still. I was standing behind the bar. Same apron, same smile, same laminated menus. But this time when Dad and Cheryl came in, I didn't just take their order. I owned their damn table. "Welcome to my restaurant," I said, voice calm, eyes steady. Cheryl's mouth opened. Dad blinked. And I smiled, 'cause I wasn't just anything anymore. Not a waitress, not a disappointment, not his little girl waiting for scraps of affection. I was the boss now, and I hadn't even begun to show them what that meant. The first time I met Heather, she was wearing my mother's necklace. At least that's what I told myself. She was sitting in the corner booth, our old booth, the one with the chipped teal vinyl, where Mom used to let me drink her ginger ale and pretend it was champagne. Heather was sipping tea, ankles crossed, flipping through her phone like she had nothing in the world to worry about. She looked nice, too nice. The kind of woman who always smells like vanilla and peppermint, who makes strangers feel like they know her and makes daughters feel like they've been replaced. And she wore the necklace like it meant nothing. A gold locket, oval, with tiny roses etched along the edge. I used to play with it while Mom braided my hair. After she died, Dad put it in the safe. Said it was too sentimental to be worn. And now Heather wore it like it was hers. "Do you like the tea?" I asked Pen, ready, trying to smile. She looked up. "Oh, you're Tara, right? Richard's daughter." "Richard?" "Not your father, not your dad. Just Richard. Like he was some man who happened to father a waitress. He said you worked here. It's so charming," she continued, glancing around. "It must feel like family being here so long." I wanted to ask her about the necklace. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because I'd learned something working here sometimes, power isn't what you say, it's what you don't. So I took her order, I made her feel important. And when I brought out her grilled salmon with capers, no butter, no salt, I placed the plate in front of her like I was serving royalty. Dad arrived 10 minutes later, late as always. He kissed her cheek like a teenager and ignored me completely. That night after close, I asked Eddie about the locket. "Could be the same one, sure," he said, washing his hands in the kitchen sink. "Or it could be a knockoff. Either way, it's not your fight." But it was. Because Heather wasn't just a new wife. She was part of a pattern. Dad had this way of remaking himself. Every 5 years or so, he'd shed the last version of his life like a snakeskin. New girlfriend, new house, new story. The only thing that stayed the same was how small I always felt around him. And it wasn't just him. There was a whole web of people who saw me as the help. Even neighbors, even family. Like my cousin Faith, who once whispered to a wedding guest, "Yeah, Tara works there, but she's not management or anything." Like being a waitress was some kind of diagnosis. Even my ex-boyfriend Reed had said it once, during a fight. "You serve people for a living? That's what you do." The irony, of course, is that most of them couldn't last a week in my shoes. The double shifts, the verbal abuse, the blistered feet, the 100 fake smiles per day. But I carried it all. Because this place, this worn-down, neon-lit, always too loud diner, was the only space I'd ever felt close to belonging. And then came him. He started coming in Tuesdays. Always at 3:15, always alone. Salt and pepper hair, tie loosened, one dimple when he smiled. Sat at the window like he was watching a life he didn't belong to anymore. At first I didn't pay attention. Men like that come and go, divorced, midlife, bored. But then he started asking questions. "How's your day going, Tara? You always work Tuesdays. Eddie treating you right?" He said it with a grin, but I felt something under it. Not creepy, not sleazy, just attention. I hadn't been seen like that in a long time. Not since Reed, not since the last time someone asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. One Tuesday I brought him an extra cookie from the kitchen. "You didn't order this," I said, placing it next to his coffee. He looked up. Maybe I was hoping someone would surprise me. His name was Michael. He was a lawyer, semi-retired. Had a daughter in college and a marriage that had ended quietly during the pandemic. He didn't talk much about the divorce, but he asked about me. He asked about my dreams. And I made the mistake of answering. I told him I wanted to own the place someday. That I was tired of feeling invisible. That sometimes I imagined walking into this restaurant as someone entirely different, someone powerful. Michael just nodded. "You don't need to be different," he said. "You just need to be seen." That night I couldn't sleep. Because for the first time in a long time someone had seen me. Not as a waitress, not as someone's daughter. Just me. And that terrified me more than I could admit. It started with a touch. A small one. Too small to matter if we'd been different people. If we hadn't been carrying things inside us that didn't have names. It was late. A storm had rolled in early that evening, the kind that made the windows tremble and turned the street outside into a blur of red taillights and shimmering rain. Most customers had cleared out. Even Eddie had gone home early, muttering something about his back and the damp. Only Michael remained. He sat in the corner booth with a paperback open and his reading glasses crooked on his nose. I was doing closing checks, pretending not to watch him, pretending not to feel the way the air shifted when he looked at me. "You ever read this?" he asked, lifting the book as I passed. I stopped. "What is it?" "Raymond Carver. Short stories. Bleak but brilliant. Sounds like my 20s. He smiled, that soft, crinkled kind of smile that felt like a private thing, like I'd earned it just by surviving. I sat, just for a minute. Just because my feet ached and the rain outside made it feel like time had slowed. He slid the book toward me, open to a folded page. This one's about a woman who realizes her husband stopped loving her 10 years ago but never left. So she starts pretending to be someone else just to see if he notices. "Does he?" I asked. Michael shook his head. "No, not even once." We were quiet after that. the hum of the coffee machine, the occasional flicker of lightning. It felt like we were the only people left in the world. I used to write, I said, surprising myself. He looked at me. What kind of things? Stories. Mostly sad ones, about people like that woman. Maybe you should start again. I shrugged. No one wants to hear from a waitress. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He reached across the table and took my hand. Just like that. No warning, no build-up, no ask. His fingers were warm, rough in some places, gentle in others. He didn't squeeze. He didn't stroke. He just held it. Like he needed to. Like I needed to. And I didn't pull away. Not even when the thunder cracked so loud I flinched. His thumb brushed across the top of my hand once slowly, and I felt a pulse in my throat that didn't belong there. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I shouldn't have. But his hand stayed, and I let it. I don't know what this is, I whispered. Me neither. We sat like that for a moment too long. And in that moment, the line blurred, not from right to wrong, but from before to after. Because I knew when I finally stood and walked away, heart racing, mouth dry, that something had shifted. I didn't sleep that night. I barely breathed. I kept replaying the way his fingers had curled into mine. How I hadn't told him to stop. How for a few minutes I hadn't felt like anyone's daughter or servant or ghost. I'd felt wanted. Not in the hungry, reckless way Reed had touched me, but in a quiet, reverent way, like I was more than my past. The next morning, I found myself outside the restaurant earlier than usual. I just stood there, staring at the sign Eddie hadn't updated in years. Trammell's Diner breakfast served all day. I wondered if people would notice if I changed it. If I renamed the place. If I made it my own. And then I wondered if Michael would still come in if I did. That night I told myself I wouldn't speak to him, that I'd serve his coffee like normal and nothing more. But when he walked in at 3:15, right on time, our eyes locked. He didn't smile. Neither did I. And yet I brought him his usual without asking. I refilled his cup before he could wave. I lingered too long at his booth when I dropped off a napkin. When I turned away, he said, Tara. I looked back. Are you okay? No one had asked me that in a real way in a very long time. I don't know, I said honestly. He nodded. Me neither. The storm was gone, but something new had begun to brew. It didn't have a name yet, but it would. And it would cost more than either of us could afford. I told myself it was harmless. A touch, a conversation, a few stolen minutes behind the veil of routine. It wasn't an affair. We hadn't even kissed. We hadn't done anything wrong, not really. But every time I saw Michael's name light up on my phone, every time he stayed an hour longer than he needed to, I felt something tight coil inside me. Guilt, maybe. Or anticipation. I tried to pull back. Really, I did. I switched my Tuesday shift with Carla, told Eddie I had a dentist appointment, then sat in my car around the block engine off just to make sure Michael still came in. He did. But he didn't stay. That was the worst part, knowing that he was coming for me. And that without me, the booth meant nothing. That should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it made me feel weak. Because I wanted to run inside. I wanted to say, forget it. Sit down, talk to me, hold my hand again. But I didn't. I let him leave. And then I went home and stared at the ceiling for 6 hours. I thought about Reed. About the way he used to trace circles on my back when we first moved in together, before he started calling me clingy. Before he started staying out late and coming home with excuses that smelled like perfume I didn't own. I thought about Dad, about the night he told me coldly that Mom's accident was my fault. Because you begged her to come pick you up, he'd said. Because you were too scared to take the bus. I was 12. I believed him. I think a part of me still does. That's the thing about guilt, it doesn't expire. It just grows roots in places you stop checking. I started writing again. I told myself it was therapy, but it was more like bleeding. Late nights after work, I'd sit at the tiny desk in my apartment, the one that wobbled if I leaned too hard, and I'd write scenes I couldn't live. A woman who ran away, who changed her name, who bought a beach house and never looked back. A woman who was loved so deeply by a man that he gave up everything just to sit next to her. None of them looked like me, but they all were me. I tried to channel that energy back into the restaurant, into the thing I could control. I fixed the jukebox. I deep-cleaned the kitchen tile no one else noticed. I created a lunch special named after Eddie, and it actually sold. Customers started asking for me, but that just made things worse, because now I had something to lose. The morning Michael showed up on a Saturday, my hands started shaking before he even opened the door. I wasn't prepared for that. He wasn't supposed to come Saturdays. He smiled like nothing had happened, ordered coffee and banana bread, asked about my writing, and then he reached into his coat and placed something on the counter. A locket. Oval gold etched with roses. My mother's locket. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. His smile faded. "I found it in a pawn shop. Downtown. I don't know why I was there. I never go to places like that. But it was sitting in the glass case, and I swear, Tara, I knew it was yours." "It's not mine," I said, voice tight. "It was my mother's. My father kept it after she died. He said it was too personal to give away." Michael's eyes darkened. "Then how did it end up there?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because we both knew. Dad had sold it, or given it to Cheryl, who pawned it when she got bored. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that something sacred had been discarded. And Michael had rescued it. I should have said thank you. Instead, I leaned over the counter and kissed him. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sweet. It was desperate. And he kissed me back. His hands on my waist, my fingers tangled in his coat. Right there in the kitchen doorway, the smell of burnt bacon in the air, the flicker of fluorescent lights above us. It was a terrible kiss. Too hungry, too fast, too full of years we hadn't spent together. But it was real, and it was a line we couldn't uncross. When we pulled away, neither of us spoke. We didn't have to, because the silence said everything. I spent the rest of the day moving through molasses, dropping orders, forgetting names, avoiding mirrors, because I wasn't the same. I'd crossed into the woman I used to write about, the one who burned her life down just to feel something. And I didn't know how to go back. 2 weeks went by. Michael stopped coming in. No text, no call, just silence. I told myself I didn't care, that it had been nothing, a moment, a slip, a bruise that would fade. But I checked my phone every night before bed. I reread our messages. The last one from him just said, "You okay?" I never answered. Because the truth was I wasn't. Not really. And I didn't know how to explain why. I focused on the restaurant, threw myself into renovations. Eddie had officially agreed to let me take over the lease by spring, and I wanted everything to be perfect. New floors, new booths, same neon sign, I couldn't let that go. It gave me something to pour into, something that didn't require me to feel. Then one rainy Tuesday, the kind of day that makes your ribs ache and your memory meaner, Dad came in. Alone. He looked thinner, maybe older. His gray hair was growing out in patches like he'd stopped pretending to care. He took his usual seat at table 7. I didn't move. Carla walked over to me behind the counter. "You want me to take him?" I shook my head. No, I got it. I walked over slowly. My apron was clean, my notepad ready. He didn't look up. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded. I poured it, black like always, set it down without spilling. He finally looked at me, not with hostility, not even annoyance. Just emptiness. "Where's Cheryl?" I asked. He stirred his coffee for a while before answering. "She left." No apology, no explanation. Just that. "She pawned Mom's locket," I said. His hand froze on the spoon. "I know," he replied. I waited for more, for regret, for a story. But that was it. He knew. I wanted to scream, to hurl the mug at the wall and watch it shatter like every part of me he ever dismissed. Instead, I asked, "Why did you give it to her?" He didn't blink, because she asked. That was the moment I stopped being his daughter. Not because of the necklace, but because of the ease with which he said it. Because she asked. I turned and walked away. Back to the counter. Back to the only place I felt like myself anymore. Later, as he was leaving, he paused by the register. "You've done well with the place," he muttered, eyes flicking around the room. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything at all. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $5 bill, left it beside the register like some offering to a ghost. Then he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years, and said, "What changed?" I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Nothing," I said softly, "absolutely nothing." He stood there a moment, unsure, then left. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled. Maybe I wasn't the woman in the stories I used to write. Not yet. But I was the author now. And that meant I could decide how the next chapter ends. Even if I didn't know what came next. It was quiet again. Too quiet. Michael was gone. Dad had vanished back into whatever cave he crawled out of. Cheryl hadn't been seen in weeks. And still I opened the restaurant every morning like clockwork. I scrubbed every counter, learned to fix the espresso machine without calling for help, installed new track lights in the hallway to the bathrooms. The more in control I looked, the more chaos I was holding inside. But no one saw that. They saw a young woman running her own place, a girl who got her act together. They didn't see the woman who still couldn't sleep through the night without checking her phone for a name that had gone silent. Until one morning a man came in and sat at table 2. I didn't recognize him at first. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, expensive coat, no wedding ring. He ordered black coffee and a bagel, sat alone, didn't look at his phone once. There was something strange about him. Not threatening, just aware. Like he was watching the whole room but pretending not to. I served him quickly with the usual smile and moved on. But he came back the next day. Same table, same order, same silence. By the third visit, I finally asked, "You new in town?" He looked up. His eyes were almost too kind, like the type of man who'd never had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. "Not exactly," he said. "I've been around, just not here." "Got a name?" I asked. He smiled. "Elijah." "Elijah," I repeated. "You don't strike me as a small-town diner kind of guy." "I'm not," he said, "but lately I've been craving something simpler." It sounded like a line. But something about him didn't feel rehearsed. He paid in cash, tipped generously, and as he left, he paused. "By the way," he said, turning back, "this place, it feels personal." "It is," I said, "I own it." "Good," he said. "That means I'll be seeing more of you." That should have been a red flag. But it felt like sunlight in winter, unfamiliar, but welcome. And so Elijah became part of the routine. He came in 4 times that week, never brought a laptop, never took calls, just sat at his table, drank his coffee, and made polite conversation. He was careful not to ask too much, but I found myself offering things anyway. Told him how long I'd worked here, that it used to belong to a man named Eddie, who still came by every other Sunday like a proud uncle, that I'd finally changed the menus and added a section for hand pies, just like my mother used to make. He listened the way Michael had. But unlike Michael, Elijah didn't ask about my past. He only asked about my future, and I wasn't used to that. "I've never met a woman who bought her way out of being underestimated," he said once. I shrugged. I didn't buy my way out. I just stopped asking permission. He looked at me differently after that. Not like I was broken or brave, but like I was dangerous in the most beautiful way. The flirtation crept in quietly. A glance too long, a joke with a pause, the brush of fingertips as I set down his receipt. But I didn't stop it, because I liked it, because part of me wanted to believe I could start over, that I could rewrite myself as someone bold, someone magnetic, someone whose father's voice no longer echoed in the back of her skull. The problem is when you tell yourself you're starting over, you forget that your past has a habit of sneaking in through the back door. And mine was about to walk in uninvited. 3 weeks after Elijah's first visit, Michael returned. Not to table 4, not at 3:15, but at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. While Elijah was still at table 2. I didn't see him at first. Carla whispered Tara, "Don't freak out. But he's here." My breath caught. Michael. Same coat, same tired eyes, a bouquet of small, pale blue flowers in his hand. Elijah glanced over his shoulder, curious. And suddenly I was split in two. The woman who wanted to run, and the woman who wanted to own the moment. I walked over to Michael slowly. He stood, nervous, not his usual calm. "I didn't know if I should come," he said, eyes darting toward Elijah. "You shouldn't have," I said gently. He held out the flowers anyway. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't take them." "I'm not mad," I said, "but I'm not waiting either." He nodded, a long pause. Then, just before turning to leave, he said, "Be careful with him." I frowned. "With who?" He looked at Elijah, and then back at me. "I've seen him before," he said, "but not here." And just like that, a new storm began to form. Not outside, inside me. Because something told me that Elijah wasn't just a man with good tips and a tragic smile. Something told me that he knew far more than he let on. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of Michael, but because of what he said. I've seen him before. It echoed in my head like a riddle with a locked answer. Elijah. The man who always showed up with clean shoes and a quiet stare. The man who didn't ask about my past but seemed to know where to press anyway. The next day he came in at his usual time. I watched him from behind the counter trying to figure out what had changed. Was his coat too crisp? Had I imagined the way he stiffened when Michael appeared? "You okay?" Carla asked, nudging me. "I don't know." I walked over to him. "Elijah." He looked up from his coffee, smiling. "Tara." "Can I ask you something?" I said, arms crossed. "Of course." "Have you been here before? Like before we met? Before this place?" His smile didn't flicker, but something in his eyes did. The tiniest ripple. "Not this restaurant," he said slowly. "But the area?" "Sure. Years ago." "Doing what?" "Business." "What kind of business?" He leaned back in the booth. "Is this an interview or a date?" "That depends on the answers." He studied me for a long second, then placed his hands flat on the table. "I used to work in development," he said. "Real estate, restaurants mostly, buying out old properties, renovating, flipping them for higher-end concepts." My throat dried. "This place was never on my radar," he added quickly. "Not until you." "Why now?" He looked out the window as if the answer might be hiding in the misted glass. "Because you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," he said softly. That made me freeze. "Who?" He paused. Her name was Grace. My mother's name. He said it so casually, like it belonged to a memory he hadn't meant to share. I didn't speak, I couldn't. Elijah kept looking out the window. She used to work at a diner in Westfield. She had this fierceness. You couldn't rattle her, not even on her worst days. My fingers trembled against my apron. My mom's name was Grace, I said quietly. Elijah turned to me, then something sharp in his eyes, but not cruel, just cautious. I know. That broke me open. I stumbled back from the table, breath caught in my throat. You knew her, I asked, voice trembling. He stood slowly, a long time ago, before you were born. What were you to her? He didn't answer. Elijah. I cared about her, he said finally. That's all I'll say. I backed away, I felt cold, my skin buzzed. You should have told me, I said. I didn't want to make this about her, he said. I wanted to know you. But you came here because of me, because of her. Yes, and also no. I didn't understand what that meant. And I hated that part of me still wanted to believe he was safe. Did she ever mention you, I asked? He hesitated. That was answer enough. She told me she had a daughter, a baby, he said. But not who the father was, or what happened after. Something in me broke and reassembled all at once. My mother, the secretive looks, the way she always paused when I asked about how she met Dad, the way he treated me like a stranger more than a daughter. I need you to leave, I said. Tara, now. He nodded once, respectful, regretful, and walked out. I stood in the empty restaurant, the clock ticking behind me, the register humming softly, and suddenly I couldn't remember who I was mad at more. Michael for warning me too late, Elijah for hiding in plain sight, or my mother for leaving me a life full of unanswered questions and men who carried pieces of her like shadows. That night I dug through the storage boxes in my closet. Old photos, newspaper clippings, yellowed recipes in her handwriting. Then I found it. A black and white photo from the 90s, my mom in a waitress uniform, standing beside a man, tall, smiling, Elijah. And on the back in her handwriting, some people are storms, some people are shelter. He was both. I sat on the floor holding it like it was glass. Because suddenly the story wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers. And it had never really ended. The photo haunted me. For 3 nights I slept with it on my nightstand. Every time I rolled over, I'd see her eyes, my mother's eyes, locked onto Elijah like she knew he was her beginning and her undoing. The scariest part wasn't the picture. It was the caption. He was both. I couldn't stop wondering what that meant. I didn't go into work the next day. Carla covered the shift. I told her I had a migraine, and maybe that was true, because something was splitting open inside me. Instead, I drove out to Westfield, 40 minutes south. A dying town with gas stations and churches and motels that rented by the hour. It wasn't hard to find the old diner. It had changed names, changed owners, but I knew the bones of it, the curve of the parking lot, the corner booth in the window, the one I imagined she used to sit in. I went inside. It smelled like fryer oil and burnt toast. The waitress behind the counter was maybe 70, short gray curls, no-nonsense face. She looked like she'd served pancakes to 4 generations and didn't regret a single one. I took a chance. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you happen to remember a woman named Grace? She worked here a long time ago." Her face changed instantly. "You her daughter?" she asked. My mouth went dry. "Yes." She leaned in. "You look just like her." And then to my surprise, she grabbed my hand and held it tightly. "I always wondered what happened to you," she whispered. I sat at the counter, heart pounding. She introduced herself as Doreen, said she worked with my mom for 3 years until one day Grace just left. She said she was moving north, closer to her family. But I knew that wasn't the truth, Doreen said, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking. "What do you mean?" "She didn't have any family. She was running, and she had a baby on her hip." My breath caught. "You," Doreen said, tapping the counter like it was punctuation. "You were the baby." I stared at her. "She came in crying one night," she continued. Said the man she loved had lied to her. Said he was married, had a kid already. She was heartbroken. Told me she'd never let her daughter grow up in that kind of shadow. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Do you know the man's name?" She squinted like she was searching through a filing cabinet in her memory. "Elliot Elijah, something like that." My whole body locked in place. "I never met him," Doreen added. "But I remember thinking if he could walk away from a woman like Grace and a baby like you, then he didn't deserve either of you." I nodded slowly, feeling like the floor was tilting. "Thank you," I said, "really." She patted my hand. "Your mama was special. Soft-spoken but fierce underneath. Like she knew how much she'd been betrayed, but she refused to let it break her." As I walked out, I felt like I'd just been told the ending of a book I thought I was still in the middle of. Elijah hadn't just known my mother. He'd loved her, and lied to her, and disappeared. And now he'd returned for what? Redemption closure me. Back home, I paced my apartment until I couldn't stand it anymore. I picked up my phone and called him. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. I know who you are. I know what you did." He didn't reply. Instead, someone else did. 30 minutes later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Meet me at the restaurant. Midnight. Come alone." I stared at the screen, the blood in my body freezing and boiling at the same time. No name. No explanation. Just that. It could have been anyone. Michael. Elijah. Even Dad. But something in my gut told me it was Elijah. And even though every instinct screamed to ignore it, I went. The restaurant was dark when I pulled up. I unlocked the door. The bell above jingled like it always did. But the place felt different. Still. Like it had been waiting. He was sitting in the booth, our booth hands folded, looking older than I remembered. "Elijah," I said, voice tight, "why did you come back?" He looked up at me. His face wasn't cold. It wasn't soft either. It was wrecked. "Because I thought I could make peace with the past," he said. "I thought maybe somehow I could make things right." "By flirting with me," I asked. "By lying to me." "I didn't know you were her daughter at first," he said. "Not until the second time I came in. But once I knew, I couldn't walk away." "Why not?" "Because Grace never told me you existed." I stared at him. "She found out I was married. She left before I could fix it. I didn't even know she was pregnant." Silence. Thick. Sharp. "Do you want a paternity test?" I asked, voice barely audible. He flinched. "Do you—" I didn't answer, because in that moment I realized I didn't know what I wanted more. To be wrong, or to finally understand why nothing in my life ever quite added up. I don't remember the drive to the clinic. I just remember my hands on the steering wheel, white-knuckled. The streets looked blurry, like I was watching the world through a fish tank. I'd made the appointment in silence, typing in my name, his name the reason. Paternity test. They called it non-invasive confidential routine. But nothing about it felt routine. Elijah had agreed, quietly, no hesitation. "If this gives you peace," he said, "I'll do it." And so we both sat there swabbing the inside of our cheeks under the fluorescence, while the nurse made small talk about the weather. The waiting period was 5 days. During that time I didn't eat, I barely slept. I couldn't walk past the mirror without seeing my mother's cheekbones, my father's eyes, and wondering who I actually belonged to. On the 4th day I got a text from Michael. "Thinking of you, no pressure, just still here." I didn't respond. Because how could I explain that I was unraveling a lie so old it had been sewn into my skin? I went back to Westfield. I needed something, anything, a clue my mother had left behind. I asked Doreen if she remembered Grace ever writing letters. She nodded. She kept a box in her locker, full of notes she never mailed. My heart leapt. "Is it still here?" "She gave it to me the night she left," Doreen said. "Told me to throw it away if I didn't hear from her after a year. But I couldn't do it." She came back 10 minutes later with a weathered shoebox wrapped in twine. I drove back to my apartment with it on my passenger seat like it was a sacred relic. Inside were scraps of her notes, receipts, sketches of pie recipes, folded napkins with half-written thoughts, and one sealed envelope, addressed to me, to my daughter when she's old enough to understand. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her handwriting was soft, looping, familiar. "Tara, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around to explain. There was someone before your father, someone who changed me in ways I still don't have words for. He was the first man to make me feel seen, and the first to break me. He didn't know about you. I never told him. By the time I found out, he was gone. Your father, Richard, he stepped in when I was drowning. He gave you his name. He raised you. But love and loyalty aren't always the same thing. There are truths I buried to protect you. But I see now that maybe lies do more damage in the long run. I hope you forgive me. I hope you find your way. You are more than either of them. You are mine, Mom." I didn't cry. I thought I would. But all I felt was stillness. Like I was finally standing on solid ground. The next day the results came in. I opened the envelope alone, standing in the middle of the restaurant, the tables still stacked from cleaning the lights dim. Elijah was my biological father. 99.97%. I stared at the number like it was a verdict. Like it could reach back and rewrite birthday's punishments. School plays the way my dad Richard used to look through me like I was a reminder of something he regretted. I didn't feel relief. I felt empty, because now I knew, and I didn't know what to do with that. Elijah texted that night, "I understand if you don't want contact, but I'd like to know you, truly, on your terms." I stared at the screen, then typed back, I don't know what I want, but I don't want lies anymore. He replied, then we're already doing better than the last generation. I sat at the bar, the same bar where I used to think being a waitress meant I'd failed. Now I knew better. I hadn't failed. I'd survived. And I had a choice. I could keep serving up silence, or I could begin to speak. The door jingled. Dad Richard walked in, slower than usual. No Cheryl, no smug expression. Just him. I got a call, he said, from Elijah. I nodded, I figured. He sat down. I raised you, he said. I changed your diapers, taught you to ride a bike, took you to every doctor's appointment. I know. I didn't want this. I didn't either. He looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw something unfamiliar in his face. Not regret, but fear. Are you still mine? He asked quietly. I thought about that. About what being someone's really meant. About the nights I'd cried alone after hearing Just a Waitress. About how he'd sold my mother's locket. About how he never once told me the truth. I was yours, I said, until you stopped showing up. He looked down. I'll always be your daughter by memory, I added. But blood doesn't make a father, and silence doesn't keep one. He stood, swallowed hard, and left. No storm this time. Just stillness. And a restaurant full of ghosts I was finally ready to face. I thought the worst was over. Turns out I'd only just cleared the debris. Owning the truth was like buying a house after a storm. You think you've cleaned up the damage, but the mold lives in the walls. The hard part is what comes after the revelation, when you realize you can't unknow anything. The week after the DNA results, I started showing up earlier than usual, scrubbing baseboards, polishing silverware no one cared about, fixing a hinge on the walk-in freezer that had squeaked for 10 years. The restaurant was finally mine, not just in paperwork, but in spirit. Eddie had made it official. A signature, a handshake, a smile too proud to hide. You earned this, kid, he said, handing me the keys like they were sacred. I cried in the bathroom, quietly, for my mother, for the girl I used to be, for the woman I was finally becoming. I was finally thinking about what came next. A soft rebrand, new logo, maybe expanding the back patio into an herb garden, maybe even building a new life with Michael if I could figure out how to trust again. That was the plan, until the knock at the back door. Not the front where customers came in, the back, where deliveries were made, where employees smoked and vendors dropped off Cisco boxes. It was past closing. Carla had just left. I was counting the till when I heard it 3 sharp knocks. Not hesitant, not frantic. Just familiar. I opened the door, heart thudding. And there she was. Cheryl. Perfectly curled hair, flawless nails, but thinner, edgier, like someone who hadn't slept well in months. Hi, sweetheart, she said. I didn't answer. Can I come in? No. She smiled sadly, I figured. What do you want? To talk, to explain. I crossed my arms. You pawned my mother's locket, I said flatly. She didn't deny it. Your father gave it to me. I didn't know it was sentimental. He told me it was costume jewelry from a thrift store. He lied. She blinked. Well, that's something we've both learned the hard way, haven't we? I should have slammed the door. I didn't. Can I just have 5 minutes, she asked. No drama, no tears. I let her in. Not because I trusted her, because I wanted to hear the story she was so desperate to tell. She sat at the staff table like it was her living room. Your father and I split, she said. 2 months ago, I left the house. He didn't fight me, didn't ask why. I didn't say anything. She looked up at me, and for once her voice dropped the condescension. He loved your mother, she said. My body went still. What? Even after she died. Especially after she died. You think he married me because I was young and charming, she laughed. No. I looked like her. That was the whole point. My stomach turned. He used to call me Grace by accident, she added, eyes gleaming. In bed, at dinner, once during Christmas. I didn't know whether to be disgusted or heartbroken. I started hating her memory, Cheryl said, because it was the only thing I couldn't compete with. She pulled something out of her bag. A small velvet box. My mother's locket. I bought it back, she said. It took me 3 pawn shops and $300, but I got it. She set it on the table between us like a peace offering. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I'm just tired of pretending I was the villain. I stared at the box. It felt like it pulsed between us. I'm not the daughter of a good man, I said finally. Cheryl nodded. Neither am I the wife of one. She stood. You don't owe me anything, she said, but if you ever want to know what he was like behind closed doors, call me. She walked out the back door and into the night. I stood there for a long time staring at the locket. Then I opened it. Inside was a photo I'd never seen before. My mother holding a baby. And a man beside her, not Richard, not Elijah, someone else. Someone whose eyes looked too familiar. Suddenly, I didn't know who to trust. Not Cheryl. Not Elijah. Not even my mother. 'Cause that photo wasn't just a memory. It was a threat to everything I thought was finally resolved. And it whispered one thing: you still don't know the full story. I brought the locket to the sink and rinsed it as if water could wash away confusion. But the photograph inside refused to fade. I stared at the man beside my mother, half smiling young, his arm draped behind her like he belonged there. He looked nothing like Elijah, and definitely not like Richard. The baby in her arms had to be me, which made the man someone I'd never heard of, someone who shouldn't exist. I took a picture of the locket and sent it to Elijah. "Do you know who this is?" He replied almost instantly. "No, where did you find that?" "Cheryl. She bought the locket back. This photo was inside." "That's not me, and I swear to you I've never seen that man." I stared at the screen, numb. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had crept in like mold, slow, silent, poisonous. I called Doreen. "Tara, did my mom ever talk about anyone else?" I asked. "Anyone after Elijah, or before Richard?" There was a long pause. Then there was a regular customer she used to spend time with. "What was his name?" "Don't know. She never said, but he had money. Used to pick her up in a black car, wore suits, didn't smile much." My mind spiraled. I went back to the box from Doreen's closet, dug through the napkins, receipts, scraps, and found it. A business card? Thomas Ellery, Executive Vice President, Alcor Hospitality Group, no phone number, just an address and a logo. I Googled it. It was a company that had once owned dozens of restaurants across the Midwest, merged, dismantled, mostly forgotten. But one detail jumped out. Alcor had been one of the early investors in Trammell's Diner, the place I now owned. I couldn't breathe. The man in the photograph, Thomas Ellery, might have been tied to the restaurant all along. And to me? I sent the photo to Michael, too, asked if he could help. He responded with a single word: yes. By that evening, he had forwarded me an old scanned lease. Thomas Ellery had been an early silent partner in Trammell's Diner. His name was on the documents buried beneath legalese and subclauses, but it was there. I printed everything, laid them out across the floor of my apartment like a crime scene. My mother, Elijah, Richard, Thomas, and me. Somewhere between them. Who was I? Who had I ever been? The DNA test had said Elijah was my biological father. But this photo complicated that. Was it a mistake? Or was there more than one secret in my mother's past? The next day I called Elijah. "I need to see you," I said, face to face. He met me at the diner, after hours, just like last time. I showed him the photo. He studied it. "This isn't about biology anymore, is it?" "No," I said. "It's about truth." He rubbed his jaw. "I took that test, Tara. I didn't need to, but I did. And the results don't lie. I know. So what do you think this is?" "I think my mother was scared," I said. "Of all three of you." Elijah looked down. "I loved her, Tara, and I lost her. That's the truth." I nodded. "And now I'm starting to think the reason she ran wasn't just shame or betrayal." "What then?" "Survival." He looked at me. "You think someone hurt her?" he asked. "I think someone owned her." We sat in silence. And then I said the one thing I hadn't dared to. "I think this man Thomas might have threatened her, and she left to keep me safe." Elijah's jaw tightened. And then quietly he said, "Then maybe you didn't just inherit a restaurant." I swallowed hard. Maybe I inherited a war. The name wouldn't leave me. Thomas Ellery. He wasn't just a ghost in a photograph anymore. He was a name on a lease, a signature in the margins of my life. I called Michael again. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Come over." I showed up at his apartment with the locket, the documents, and a bottle of whiskey I had no intention of sharing. He took one look at the lease copy I'd found and went still. "This signature," he said, tracing it with his finger. "It's dated 2 days after your mother left Westfield." My throat tightened. So, if Thomas was involved with her and suddenly buys into the diner right after she runs, then either he was looking for her or buying silence. That word clanged like a dropped pan silence. Michael pulled out his laptop, searched court archives, business registries. I sat across from him, clutching the velvet box like it was armor. He found a name. Alcor Group, lawsuit 2003. A former waitress had filed a complaint against the company. The claim was vague, inappropriate conduct, coercion, abuse of power. Settled quietly. No names were listed except one Thomas Ellery executive oversight. The documents were sealed, no way to get details. But it didn't take a detective to draw the lines between the dots. "Do you think he hurt her?" I asked. Michael looked at me. "I think she was scared enough to vanish. That says more than any court record ever could." I took a deep breath. "I own a place he once controlled," I said. "I wonder if that's what this is really about." "You think Cheryl knew—" I thought of the way she looked at the locket, the way she said, I started hating her memory. Maybe it wasn't just about the locket. Maybe she found out more than she was supposed to. Maybe she pawned it on purpose, I said, so it would find its way back to me. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's a generous interpretation. I'm tired of being cynical. That night I couldn't sleep again, so I went to the restaurant, alone. I unlocked the front door and walked into the quiet, the dark booths, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ghost of my mother in every corner. I sat at table 7, my father's old table, and then I walked to table 2, Elijah's. Then to the booth in the corner, the one where Cheryl first wore the locket like it meant nothing. The chairs felt different now. Every table was a chapter. I turned off all the lights but one, and I sat in the glow and opened the locket again. The photo was fading, but her eyes still stared through me. Not pleading, not soft. Just steady. Like she'd known I'd come looking one day. I opened the register drawer. Inside was a list of suppliers' old invoices and tucked into the back a folded napkin. Eddie's handwriting. If anything happens to me, ask Tara to check the red file in the office safe. My heart stopped. I ran to the office. I hadn't opened the safe since the day the deed was signed over. The combination was Eddie's birthday. Inside in the back behind some old payroll logs was a red folder. I pulled it out. Inside, copies of contracts, personal notes, and a handwritten letter from Eddie. Ta-ra! I never told you this because I wanted you to own this place without a shadow over it. But when I first took over from the Alcor group, I found out some things. Your mother used to work here before I bought it out. She was a waitress, quiet, always tired, always looking over her shoulder. One day she didn't show up, no notice, no goodbye, just gone. A week later a man came in asking questions, said he was from Alcor. His name was Ellery. He offered me double the going rate for the building. I said no. He didn't like that. The deal got ugly, lawyers, threats. I held on anyway. I don't know what he wanted, but I always wondered if it had something to do with your mother. When you started working here, I figured fate was playing its cards again. When you said you wanted to buy the place, I knew it was time. You deserve the truth, but I hope you'll still choose peace. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the folder, and I cried. For her. For me. For the girl I used to be who thought just a waitress was a prison, not a legacy. Because maybe I wasn't here to rewrite the past. Maybe I was here to protect what was left of it. 3 days passed after I read Eddie's letter. I didn't tell anyone. Not Elijah, not Michael, not Carla. It sat inside me like a burning coal glowing hotter every hour. I wanted to call a reporter. Publish everything. Scream it into a microphone. My mother disappeared because a man with money decided she didn't matter. But I didn't. Because I knew what would happen. The restaurant would become a scandal headline. My mother's name dragged across the internet like a cautionary tale. My ownership would be questioned. The lease, the inheritance, the credibility. And I didn't want to lose her again. Not like that. I thought maybe I could let it rest. Until Cheryl showed up again. This time through the front door. She wore all black, not funeral black. More like reckoning black. I don't need a coffee, she said. I need 10 minutes. I motioned to the booth. She didn't sit. Instead, she pulled a folded sheet of paper from her purse and placed it on the table. I lied to you, she said. I waited. I didn't just find the locket. I went looking. I raised an eyebrow. She took a breath. After your father and I split, I was angry. I wanted to hurt him the way he hurt me. So I started digging. Through old boxes, emails, bank records. I stayed silent. I found letters, she said. Ones he'd hidden. From your mom. From someone named Thomas. My stomach turned. I knew he was obsessed with her, Cheryl continued. But I didn't know how much he'd tried to erase. I found notes she wrote asking him to stop contacting her, asking him to leave her alone, and I found records that suggested he paid a PI. My breath caught. He hired someone to follow her. I felt like the floor was dropping. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Cheryl looked tired. Because for a long time I thought you were the problem, she said. A living reminder of everything I couldn't compete with. But now, I think you were the only one telling the truth. I sat down slowly. I went to the lawyer, she said, to draw up a statement. This paper, she tapped it. It documents everything. The letters, the PI. Your dad's attempts to cover it up. I've signed it. You can do what you want with it. I stared at her. Why now? I asked again. She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, because I don't want to be the villain in someone else's story anymore. I've played that role long enough. She stood. Good luck, Tara. And then she left. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was all there. Sworn affidavit, attached scans of letters, a timeline, an official notary stamp at the bottom. Proof. Not just of Thomas's involvement, but of Richard's, my father. The man who had called me just a waitress while burying his own guilt 6 feet under the life I'd tried to build. The next morning I went to the diner early. I stared at the register, the booths, the worn linoleum that had never quite shined, and I made a choice. I walked to the back office, pulled out my phone, called a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, Lake County Herald Investigations Desk. I cleared my throat. My name is Tara Ellery, I said. I own Trammell's Diner. I have a story for you. There was a long pause. Go ahead, the reporter said. And I told it. Every word. The betrayal, the business, the men, the woman they thought they could erase. My mother. I gave them the affidavit. I gave them the lease. I gave them her name. And then I sat in the silence, waiting. 'Cause some legacies aren't rebuilt quietly. Some truths have to be loud, even if they crack the walls of everything you built. The article dropped on a Sunday morning. Front page of the Lake County Herald, the woman they tried to erase a waitress's fight to uncover her mother's disappearance. It had everything. My name, my mother's name, Eddie's letter, Cheryl's affidavit, even a photo of the diner, my diner, taken just before sunrise. The story painted my mother as a victim of corporate abuse and hinted without naming names that both Thomas Ellery and my father Richard had tried to buy her silence and possibly intimidate her into disappearing. By 10:00 a.m. the phone started ringing. First the curious calls, then the hateful ones. By noon, someone had left a 1-star review on our Google page that simply read, "This place is built on lies." Carla called from home. You okay, she asked. No, I said. She didn't push. By 1:00 p.m., Elijah showed up. Quiet, hands in his coat pockets. No umbrella despite the rain. He didn't speak for the first few minutes. Just stood in the middle of the restaurant, eyes scanning the booths like he was seeing them for the first time. I read it, he said finally. I figured. He stepped closer. Are you safe? I hesitated. I think so, for now. He sat at his usual table. I sat across from him. You didn't mention me by name, he said. I didn't need to. You weren't the threat. You were just the truth. His eyes softened. You could have kept it quiet. Could have moved on. I could have, I said, but she didn't get to. He nodded. We sat in silence again until he said the thing that had been hovering in the air between us for days. I'm proud of you. I didn't cry. Not then. Because the next blow came at 3:47 p.m. A black sedan pulled into the lot, parked directly in front of the restaurant. The back door opened. Richard stepped out. He hadn't called. Hadn't warned me. He walked in like he still owned something here. He wore a charcoal suit perfectly pressed the way he always had when pretending to be the man he wanted others to believe he was. Richard, Elijah said, rising. Sit, I said to Elijah, please. Richard looked at me. You really went to the press, he said, not a question. I did. You know what you've done. I told the truth. He exhaled sharply. The truth, Tara, you just turned our family into a headline. No, I said. You did that. Years ago, I just lit the lantern. He walked slowly toward the counter. Glanced around at the empty booths, the lights overhead, the worn floor beneath us. Your mother wasn't some saint, he said. She made choices. So did you, I snapped. You married her. Then you hunted her. Then you erased her. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You don't know what it was like, he said, voice low. Watching her leave with you. Watching her run because she was too proud to let me be a father. She didn't run from you, I said. She ran from him. He looked away, and that was all the confirmation I needed. You knew, I whispered. You knew what Thomas did to her. He didn't respond. You let it happen, I said louder now. You covered for him. And then you married Cheryl like it was a distraction. You sat in this diner every week and looked at me like I was a stranger when really I was the thing you couldn't control. Finally, he looked at me. I didn't know how to love you, he said, because you reminded me of everything I'd lost, everything I'd failed to fix. That wasn't my job. No, he said quietly. It wasn't. He stepped back. I came to tell you that you've made powerful people angry. I'm not scared of them. You should be. I stared at him. I'm not 12 anymore, I said, and I'm not your waitress. His eyes narrowed, but there was something else beneath it, something that looked almost like grief. He walked to the door, paused, then without turning said, She never forgave me, but I still loved her. And then he left. I stood in the stillness, shaking. Elijah reached across the table, held my hand. You're going to be okay, he said, and I believed him. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving a story someone else wrote for me. I was writing my own. 3 months passed. The article faded from the news cycle. The angry calls stopped. The 5-star reviews started to outnumber the 1 stars again. Some people came in just to say, "We read your story." Others came in and never mentioned it at all, but left larger tips, kinder eyes. Elijah and I talked often. We didn't call each other father and daughter. We didn't need to. Some truths are heavier than labels, but lighter once shared. Michael came back too, slowly, softly. He didn't try to fix me, he just listened. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. As for Richard, he never came back. No letter, no call, just silence. It didn't feel like abandonment this time. It felt like peace. I finally replaced the old Trammell's sign. It wasn't a rebrand, not really. I kept the neon glow, kept the lettering classic. But I added something below the name. Grace's, in honor of her. Of every woman who's been told to keep quiet, sit pretty, stay small. Of the ones who had to run to survive. And the ones who stayed behind and learned to fight anyway. On opening day of the new signage, we gave away free pie. The kind she used to make. Apple cinnamon with brown sugar crumble on top. I stood at the register while Carla rang people up. An older woman came up to me and said, "It's just a pie, but it tastes like something brave." I smiled. And for the first time in my life, I believed I'd earned it. Later that evening, as we cleaned up, I sat at table 7, Richard's old table. The one where he used to sit with Cheryl and pretend I didn't exist. I ran my hand along the edge. It had a new scratch, a small one, from a kid who dragged his Hot Wheels across it last week. I liked it. It felt honest. Before I turned out the lights, I taped something underneath the table, just for me. A note folded tight. It said, "You were never just a waitress. You were the one who stayed, the one who remembered, the one who rewrote it all. And in case you forget again, read this. Then go take back your shift, sweetheart, because you own this place now." All of it. And I do. I own the place. The pain, the past, the power. The silence that almost swallowed me. And the voice that finally broke through. So next time someone walks in and says, "Aren't you just the owner now?" I'll smile. I'll hand them their coffee. And I'll say, "No, darling, I'm everything they told me I'd never be."